Hi, today we'll be talking about when pawns race and they're connected. Like in this position, where it looks like the black king can just go back and forth between these two pawns, and that the white king can try to catch this pawn, but as soon as it catches the one that is behind, the other one will just race forward. So it's like this pawn is untouchable. But before we do that, I want to go into detail into this position, which is a situation where these two pawns are also connected, but on h7 and g6, but then you have the pawns on a4 and c5 which are disconnected. And the winning tactic is for white to march his king over to f6 or f7, and usually f7. Sacrifice his pawn so that the king can go to h8, then march this pawn up with check so that the black king goes after g7 check. The black king has to go to h7 and then g8, queens, king h6, and then queen g6 checkmate. So all in all, if we could do that right now, it would take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would take 5 moves, but this pawn only needs 1, 2, 3 moves to promote. And the thing is, when we promote with check, the king has to move. So really, it's like 1, 2, 3, and that doesn't count because the king moves and not the pawn. And then so it's 4. And when you have the king here and the pawn here and the king here, it's check the next turn, so black has to do something to stop that. At that moment, it's also black's third move. Again, king c4, followed by king d5, king e6, and then king f7. So that's 3 moves, which is all that black needs to do to promote. And when black promotes to a queen, then the queen controls the queening diagonal on g7, the square g7. So if the pawn goes to g7, the queen just takes on g7 and white loses. So let's see that in action. So king c4 and now king h8, and white can't go to king d5. So let's see, that's 1 move. So a3, 2 moves, a2, 3 moves, and now we queen. So just like we counted, the black queen will control this queening square, and white's not on time. So that's the issue. If white can't really do anything much here, he has to contain these pawns like we talked about in the previous video, where you have separated pawns. And this pawn is untouchable because of a3. And white can only go to king c3 after king h8, king c3. And this is a draw. But if we go to this position where it's 1 rank less, then like we already saw before, white actually wins after king d4. And then a4, king e5, a3, king f6, a2, g7 check. Oh, hold on. So yeah, king h7, king f7, and now if you queen, which is your 1 move late, and then queen g8 check, king h6, queen g6 checkmate. So let's look at that again. So just like we saw, we need 1, 2, 3. So if it gets to king f6 or king f7, we're okay. That's 3 moves by the time black will only be on a2 with this pawn. So black has to try something else. For example, if king d4, king g7, but now we can do king e5, a4, sacrifice the pawn. He takes, well, we can't sacrifice just yet because if we do that, then after king f6, king g8. So we can't sacrifice the pawn yet. So a4, we're going to get control of f7. So king e6, a3, and now we can sacrifice the pawn. Queen h8 check, and then king takes h8, king f7, a2, and now we do the 4-scene checkmate. d7 check, king h7, g8 queen, king h6, and then queen d6 checkmate. So it's the same thing here. If we notice though, the queen will end up on c1. And on c1 it doesn't control any of the squares g8 or g6. So we might actually be able to make it on time. For example, after king e4, king g7, what we need to do is king takes e5, c3, king e6, c2, promote to a queen, king takes h8, king f7, queen, and then the 3-step forcing mate. This is basically mate right here. g7 check, king h7, queens on g8, king h6, and then queen to g6 checkmate. So king g7, king takes e5, a3, king e6, and now a2, promote to a queen, takes, king takes h8, king f7, and that's checkmate. King only move is queen c1, g7 check, king h7, promote to a queen on g8, king h6, and then checkmate, because there's no control of the queen e square. So if we talk about it in a calculation, we need 3 squares to get to here, because this doesn't count where we promote and then he takes, because that doesn't move the pawn. So after we get here in 3 moves, he'll have promoted, but then we will have pushed the pawn. So here is an example where it's a draw, because after you black queens on b1, it controls g6, the mating square. So for example, king d4, and now king h8. I could do king takes d5 or king e5, it doesn't matter, because we just want to get to f7. King takes d5, b3, king e6, b2, and now the forcing maneuver starts. King f7, queen b1, g7 check, king takes h7, queen g8 check, king to h6, and there's no checkmate. Queen h8, and you could just straight queens here, and that's a draw. So that's an important thing to remember. And here it's the same thing we saw before. Basically it's black to move here, and after black moves, he only has that, and we've reached the same position as before, where we just go king c5, and then he has to go king h8, because if not, if he goes to a4, we just go a4 king b4, for example, a4 king b4, and we just capture the pawn. It's not protected anymore. So he has to go back to king h8 after king c5, king h8. Now we need 3 moves, and by then he'll only be at a2, and it's mate. King d6, a4, king e3, king e7, a3, king f7, a2. That's mate. He could try something after king d6, a4, king to e7, king g7, but like we've said, this really doesn't matter. Queen h8, king takes h8, and that's mate. Next move. Not that it's mate next move, but it's forced mate next move. Now we can go back to this position, where you've observed that if the king is cornered, like on e8, you can just march the king here, and then push the pawn here, and it's checkmate. Because this pawn is protected, the king has a barrier, this pawn is preventing that escape, and then when the pawn goes here, then this is a red zone, and so the king is trapped in its checkmate. So we can start by playing king to e5, and then if a3, king e6, and it's mate next move. But after king e5, he can play king f7. So that stops any king e6 ideas. However, this pawn still can't be taken. So our strategy is to try to contain these pawns somehow. And so let's think about it for a minute. What can white possibly do here? So after king e5, king e7, king d4, and now if king e8, then we can do a cool little trick by chasing this pawn. We just go king c5, and then the only move is king c4, and then the only move is c5. And then we could just play, let's see, because if we take this pawn, he's going to play b3. So you got to think about that for a minute. The king is on e8 right now, because after king d4, and he can play c5. So we got to decide if we should take that pawn or not. The thing is that if we take the pawn right now, then he plays b3, king d6, threatening king d7 and promotion. But then he can just play b2, king d7, and now you can just take the pawn. There's no skewer because the black king's not on the diagonal, so that clearly doesn't work. We can't take the pawn, but we could actually just contain it. And after king e8, now we can play king d5. And if king f7, king d6, b3, king d7, and now it works because the pawn's not on b2 like it was in this variation, so in the other variation that we analyzed. So we can just play king d5. The only move here is b3. If king f7, king d6 as before, so b3, but now we can just play king e6. So that's how you basically win. You get him in Zugzwang. So he's not going to play c5, he's going to play c6 and try to trick you. And now we can try to chase the pawn again. King c4, c5. And this might actually be a draw, because if we go to king d5 as before, the pawn will go to b3, king d6, b2, and like we've seen, that's a draw. So we have to lure the king back to e8. So after c6, we have to play some move. But what move could we possibly do? Well, we got to do a move that somehow keeps us in the square of this pawn. And the square of this pawn is this. So we have to go somewhere over here. These are our possible moves. Anywhere here, because it's all in the square of the pawn. Now, if we go back to e4, he just goes back to, let's see, can he go back to king e8? Well, you can't go back to king e8 because after king e8, king e5, king f7, b3, king f7, alright, king d6, b3, king d7, and we queen. So after king e4, the only move is he might just play b3 here. And then after king d3, c5, and that's a draw. So you can't play king e4. After c6, you can't play king e4 because of c5. So you can't also play king d3 because of c5, and you can't play king e4 because of c5. These moves are out of the way, and so is this one because it's illegal. So the only move is well, actually, after king d3, c5, now king c4. And that's the only move, because we can only get to the square from d3. And now he has to go back to e8. So now we can play king d5, and king f7 is the only move. But now we can play king d6, b3, king d7, and now we queen. And finally, here is the last puzzle. So let me see something. Yeah, that's the last puzzle. So the trick here is that we can't get out of the square of this pawn until we push our pawns far enough to be able to deliver checkmate. That's the same checkmating pattern as we saw before. So we have to push these pawns as far as possible. And the pawns will be here, and our king will be here. The black king will be on either g8 or h8. Well, actually, our king will be on g6. So we can play king e4, and that threatens king f4 followed by promotion. So he can play king to g4, but now he can play h4. So remember, the pawn's protected. If the king takes, then h5, and king f3, we can just play king d3. But not h6 because of, well, actually h6 might still win. King e2, h7, yeah, that still wins, but it's technically better just to blockade the pawn when the black king's out the square, so that doesn't work. King g4, h4, and the black king will still try to blockade you by playing h5. Now we can't push g4 yet because the king takes h4, so we have to play king f4, protecting the pawn and the square. We want to protect the pass, so after king f4, keeping him in the square, then king to g6. If king h6, it's the same thing. We just push g4, and then king g6, h5, followed by king h6, king f3, or let's see, yeah, king f3, followed by king g5 and king g4, and then king h6, and then king g4. So now it's his move and he can't come here. So we did a little trick where he forced the move on him, and we'll talk about that later when you're maneuvering for a king position. So he'll move just king g6. It's the same thing. So king g6, and now g4. And if king h6 now, then h5, pushing him back. So either king g7 or h7 is the same thing. g5, king h7, and now you see that we have to push the pawns. We can actually push the pawns forward here. So after h6, king g6, king g4, king h7, and now we leave the square to king f5, then he'll play d3. And then if king f6, then d2, and it doesn't look like we're going to get there on time yet. So we have to push the pawns forward one more rank. But how are we going to do that? Well, we could play, instead of h6, we could play g6. And now he can play king h6, but now we can play king g4. So he'll have to play king g7. And now we can push the pawns forward again by playing king g5, d3, h6, and now this is going to be mate because the pawns are on this rank. So we can analyze king h8. If king h8, then king f6, d2, king f7, and like we've seen before, this is a forced mate. So that's not going to work. His only move then is king g8, and after h7 is the same forced thing. Well, we can't just play h7 yet, because if we play h7, then king g7, h8 queens, king takes h8, king f6, king g8, keeping the blockade, so that's not good. So we have to move the king to f6 first. d2, h7 check, king h8, and now we have the forced mate that we've seen before. So that's it on promoting your connected pawns against the other connected pawns. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like. Feel free to donate. Those are very much appreciated. And next video we'll be talking about disconnected pawn races.